Hey everyone, does Christopher Nolan think Odysseus needs therapy? I'm Rich Lowry of National Review, and that's a cheeky way to get at the big issue in this new Christopher Nolan version of the Odyssey, which is how he deals with the main character, Odysseus. So, a couple things off the top. One, if you haven't seen this movie, there are plot spoilers in this video. If you don't want to know anything else about it until you see it, stop watching this video now. I have all sorts of other awesome videos you can watch in the meantime. Two, I think it's a great movie. It's entertaining, it's gripping, displays, not surprisingly, a great technical proficiency, flashing forward and back in time, and all the rest of it. But there is this question of how Nolan deals with the main character. And that's the big potential problem in this movie. It's not Lupita Nyong'o playing Helen. That's fine. It's only 10 minutes, by the way, in a 3-hour movie or nearly 3-hour movie. But the question is about Odysseus. So Odysseus is a great warrior. He's also very smart. He's into wordplay. He's very wily. He comes up with the idea for the Trojan horse that wins the Greeks the war with Troy. When this peace offering is taken in within the walls of Troy, he comes up with this great trick when he's heading home on his great journey, and they encounter Cyclops, he and his men. He tells the Cyclops that his name is Nolan. So when the Cyclops is wounded by Odysseus and his men and other monsters come to his aid, they say, "Who did this to you?" "No one did this to me. No one is attacking me." So the other Cyclops are, "Oh, okay, well, it's a natural ailment. We can't help you then." And he's also obviously very devoted to family and to getting home, but he's also unfaithful to Penelope, who's waiting there very patiently for him to come home. As we would put it, Odysseus is a complicated figure. The Odyssey opens by asking the muse to sing of a man of many ways or of twists and turns. But what Nolan does with this very interesting and fraught figure, he makes him racked with war guilt, gives him basically PTSD over the Trojan War, and also burdens him with this realization that that war and how the Greeks waged it, and in particular, the trickery of the Trojan horse, are going to bring an end to their own civilization. And none of this is supported in Homer, or at least is an exaggerated version of what we read in Homer. But first, let me make some points in favor of Nolan's interpretation, or for the argument that they are within the realm of reasonable. One, yes, Homer portrays war as a proving ground for glory, but he is also unsparing about the suffering that it causes, starkly portrays it. One of the most affecting scenes in the Iliad comes at the end. Achilles, the great Greek hero, has killed Hector, the champion of Troy. Achilles is out of his mind with rage, is dragging around Hector's dead body, which is a shocking offense to everything that is sacred in this society, shocks the gods because he's so angry that Hector had killed his companion Patroclus, and Hector's father Priam goes to Achilles and begs Achilles for the body back. Then in this incredibly moving scene, Priam begs Achilles to remember his own father. And then he says, "I've endured what no other mortal has endured. I have lifted to my lips the hand of the man who killed my son." And they cry together, and Achilles does indeed give back Hector's body. Then in the Odyssey, we have this amazing scene in Hades. So Achilles had been given a choice at the beginning of his life, two fates: short life, a lot of glory, name will live on forever. Hey, we're talking about him now. Or a longer life without glory. Chooses obviously the short life. Odysseus meets him in Hades, where he is with the dead. And Achilles, incredibly enough, says this: "Do not try to comfort me about death, glorious Odysseus. I would rather be a hired laborer working for another man, even a poor man with little property, than rule over all the dead." So there you have Achilles basically saying, you know what, it'd be better to have been an insurance salesman rather than being down here in Hades prematurely. Now, there are a couple ways to interpret this. One is just now that he's in Hades in a shade, it's not a great existence. He's stumbling around, can't speak unless he drinks blood, something that's portrayed in a brilliant and haunting way in the Christopher Nolan movie. Or you can look at it as a more fundamental challenge and reversal of the values, warrior values of the Iliad. Then you also have the fact, by the way, that Odysseus is quite the crier. There's a scene in book 8 where he hears the songs of the Trojan War and he begins to cry. There's this extraordinary description. As a woman throws herself upon her husband who has fallen fighting before his city and his people, and she wails while others drag her away into slavery, so Odysseus shed tears beneath his brows. Wow, comparing this great warrior to a bereaved widow, stunning stuff. Odysseus cries at other times, by the way, and there's nothing inconsistent with crying and being a great statesman. Winston Churchill, for instance, cried all the time. Now, also and finally, Nolan might be tapping into other aspects of the ancient literary tradition or the Western literary tradition at large. Sophocles portrays Odysseus in a much more negative light. His plotting and deceptions aren't as admirable as they're portrayed in Homer. Virgil portrays him as cunning and unworthy, as you'd expect, because the hero of his epic is Aeneas, great Trojan figure, of course. The great Euripides play, the Trojan women, very down on Odysseus and down on warfare in general. If you leap ahead, Dante puts Odysseus in the 8th circle of hell for those guilty of fraudulent counsel, which is what he gets for coming up with the idea of the Trojan horse, among other things. Nolan also may draw on Tennyson's, the poet's depiction of Odysseus. Put a pin on that one because we're going to come back to it at the end. But all this other literary material suggests, well, yeah, you know, if Odysseus feels guilty, maybe he has a lot to feel guilty about. Also, the critic Spencer Clavin, who's written a lot about this movie, a brilliant guy, makes the point, cites an Oscar Wilde character for the proposition that there's no such thing as one Hamlet. Works of art are living things, and they're made anew in effect with every reading and every performance. And the same thing is true of Odysseus. But I think the two key things about Nolan's interpretation of Odysseus do violence to the original Homer. One, the Greeks considered warfare an innate aspect of reality and human nature. Odysseus might have felt guilty about various things. He wouldn't have felt guilty about waging a war and defeating the Trojans in a war. Two, the key through line through the whole story of the Odyssey and Odysseus' character is that he wants to go home. This is brought home by the story of Calypso when he's on her island for 7 years. She's divine. She offers him a mortal life, experiencing nothing but pleasure if he stays with her, but he doesn't want to. He wants to go home. And Nolan, for understandable reasons, he has to compress a lot of the story, skips over this part and makes it sound as though, says that Odysseus doesn't want to go home, doesn't really want to go home until he works through all his dark memories of the war in Troy. And this is just totally counter to his character and to the story. He also skips over the fact that he's sleeping with Calypso on the island. But fine, the key thing is that he really, really, really wants to get back to Ithaca. Now, in case you think I'm making this up, there are a lot of reviewers who have made the same points. Here's one. And of all places, The Guardian. The classicist Emily Hauser wrote, Homer's Odysseus is cunning with an edge of pride, a liar and a storyteller with the smarts to wile himself out of any situation and a determination at almost any cost to get his homecoming. Nolan's Odysseus makes gestures to complexity, but here's a modern-day Hollywood hero who learns remorse for the atrocities he commits and spends much of his time trying to excuse having lost all his men and retrospectively earning their forgiveness. There's another layer that Nolan adds. His Odysseus is riddled with trauma and guilt, not only for the deaths of his men, but for the death and destruction he caused in Troy. And it's even bigger than that. The Trojan War is unglued civilization. Odysseus' crime and atonement in Nolan then is not only for the loss of his crew, but also for the death of a civilization. Now, that's quite the burden to carry Honey, I've not just been away for 20 years, I have created the predicate for the end of our civilization. A lot of commentators have picked up on a similarity with another Nolan film, Oppenheimer, where the great scientist feels guilty about his work developing the atom bomb, just the way Odysseus supposedly feels guilty about the Trojan horse. But Oppenheimer clearly made the correct choice. And similarly, in the red and tooth and claw world of the Greeks, Odysseus made the correct choice in the war with Troy. So Nolan has made an Odysseus that's more recognizable, more sympathetic to us, but clearly something is lost in this. A review in Compact made this point. It says of Odysseus, goddesses don't pity this man. They love him. They find him sexy. He is the most interesting man in the world. But Nolan flattens him out to a humorless, charmless, brave, but anguished warrior. A review in The New Yorker makes much the same point. Psychologizing Odysseus like this lends the Odyssey a readily digestible modernity. Ancient Greeks, they're just like us, but does so at the expense of the richness of detail and the societal complexity that makes reading Homer such a vital and immediate experience. And the suppression of much of the story's cruelty is more than mere bowdlerizing. It represents an effort to redeem Odysseus for modern times and to render him both sympathetic and tragic. Then there's the very end of the movie where Nolan has Odysseus handing over, in effect, the keys to the kingdom to his son Telemachus and heading out again with Penelope. They're going on a cruise. They're going to have a grand time exploring the world. None of this responsibility back in Ithaca for them. The review in Compact is quite tough on this ending. Homer carefully begins Odysseus' journey on Calypso's island, where he lives with a beautiful goddess and has no responsibility, yet is still unhappy, and it ends on Ithaca, where everything is a struggle and a responsibility. But that is where true satisfaction resides. Nolan has come to a different conclusion, however. It was a mistake to go to Troy. It was a mistake to win that war. And being king of Ithaca is not worth the responsibility. So Nolan ends the film with Odysseus and Penelope leaving. So that interprets the ending of the Nolan film as basically an abdication, as a literal abdication and a moral abdication. But I think there's a much more generous and favorable way to look at it. Remember a couple minutes ago, we put a pin on Tennyson. He wrote this poem called Ulysses about Odysseus, Ulysses from the Latin version of his name. And he too has Odysseus leaving again at the end, and there's this wonderful line, to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. Now, this is almost directly quoted at the end of the Nolan movie. When they're about to head out, Penelope asks, towards the sinking sun. Odysseus replies, with your fastest ship, with your best sailors, we will head for the horizon to chase the elusive sun. Now, in Nolan, it's a little different than Tennyson, because Nolan, there's an element where he's going to honor his fallen comrades and seek forgiveness or redemption, but there's still this questing spirit that's underlined in Tennyson. Odysseus in Tennyson says, I cannot rest from travel. I am part of all that I have met. In Dante, remember we got a negative interpretation of Odysseus there, we hear much the same thing. He also has him leaving Ithaca again. Neither tenderness for my son, nor reverence for my aged father, nor the love I owed Penelope, which should have made her happy, could overcome in me the longing I had to gain experience of the world and of human vice and worth. There you have it. With some differences, you have Dante and Tennyson and Nolan all circling around the same interpretation of Odysseus and his decision to leave again. Tennyson at one point has him saying, come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. And the poem famously ends, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. In that, I hear the ethic and the motive at the end of the day of Western explorers who did indeed find newer worlds, including this one on our shores here, and a new society and civilization that probably would have been very hard for the people besieging Troy and its defenders to have imagined. But I think the sentiment at the end, it's so true, it's so beautiful, it's so important, which is why, with some misgivings, at the end of the day, I'm 2 thumbs up on Christopher Nolan's Odyssey. Hey, by the way, this is a rich topic. Comment, like, subscribe. I promise you won't regret it. I'm Rich Lowry, and always be questing.